Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we're set to deliberate the latest developments here in Israel with focus on the Gaza Strip, Judea and Samaria, Lebanon, Iran, and much more, it's always important to remember how this war began. 364 days ago, on October 7th of last year, the Islamist Hamas and its terror affiliates in the Gaza Strip launched a surprise onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,200 mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping 246 people, including elderly, men, women, children, and infants. 101 of them remain in Hamas captivity to date. The subsequent day, Iran essentially joined the war when it greenlighted its proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah, to launch cross-border attacks against Israel. Since then, this Iranian proxy has launched roughly 10,000 projectiles toward Israeli territory, and not only this Iranian proxy in Lebanon, but additional proxies, including in Syria and Iraq and Yemen, including Iran proper, when it made the mistake of directly targeting Israel for a second time earlier this week, forcing Israel to take a decision to retaliate, and this will happen in the next couple of days, according to a number of sources here in Israel. And to deliberate that and much more, let's now turn to our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, what can you tell us on the latest? The clock is ticking as not only a metaphor, but it seems that Israel is resolved and currently negotiating the scope and the various targets with their American counterparts.
Indeed, that's exactly right. And to see how the war has been transformed, we only have to look back about 3 weeks ago when the talk was about a ceasefire or two, the 21-day pause, which was suggested for Lebanon. The then head of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, said that he is willing to do it, provided there is also a similar ceasefire in Gaza, which was not in the cards. And over these last 3 weeks, Hezbollah has been decimated. Its force has been degraded, both in the Beirut hierarchy, as the Americans have said it today. Not only was Nasrallah himself eliminated, but also the second and third echelons of Hezbollah officers, their deputies, lower-ranking subordinates. They have all been systematically killed by Israel. The latest to go was the veteran head of their communication system, which, of course, will hamper Hezbollah's ability to reconstitute what it lost with the beepers, with the walkie-talkies, and other blows it has suffered. But this is in the north.
Mr. Owen, I'd like to stop you for a moment and interject. There are reports about Hashem Sefyadin, the designated replacement of Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah, who was eliminated several days ago. It seems like he was also targeted, and there are reports about him also being eliminated alongside this communications head of Hezbollah.
Well, there is yet to be given any official statement either in Beirut or in Tel Aviv. But if he was not eliminated at that time, he is obviously still going to be a top target, a high-value target for Israel. And maybe we will know the answer when we have a full readout of the meetings that the Iranian Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi, is having in Beirut. He has, of course, flew in. Israel let his plane land, even though it might have also been transporting munitions under his quote-unquote diplomatic immunity. And we will see whether what he came to Lebanon to talk about was to give them the reasons why Iran is now fearful of an escalation, or whether he came for a pep talk to boost the morale in Hezbollah's ranks, which, for obvious reasons, has fallen into an all-time low.
Thank you, Mr. Oren. Before we move to the southern front, I'd like to turn to our next panelist, the commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense, namely Brigadier General in Reserve Doron Gavish. It's good to see you, General. I'd like to point out that during the Second Lebanon War, the Israeli Air Force struck roughly 200 targets a day. Now what we're seeing, the Israeli Air Force striking up to 2,000 targets a day, with a number of your colleagues in the Air Force highlighting that what Israel struck in 34 days, now it's doing in roughly between 48 to 60 hours. Is this perpetually forcing Hezbollah to try and revitalize itself, or to waken up from a state of disarray, seemingly failing to do so time and again, since it is genuinely, according to all the reports indicated, in a state that it's not managing to reemerge as a organized fighting force?
Well, indeed, Jonathan, the targets that you just mentioned, this is basically something that was structured during the last 10 years and probably even more. But this is intelligence work that was done together, the Israeli Air Force, the Northern Command, the Israeli intelligence, everyone together. This is what they did really for years, is that making sure that there is a map with all those targets, Hezbollah targets in Lebanon, because unfortunately it was known that the day would come. The other thing is that Israel wants, as much as it can, short wars. And we understand that if we could strike the Hezbollah in a way that it would be neutralized in the few days or week, this is basically what we would like that would happen. We should be humble and mainly in what we project and foresee. But looking back, we could say for sure that the Hezbollah is not exactly reacting according to what he was saying that he would do, and also to some of the intelligence reports. The amounts of rockets that we all expected, which are thousands, are not there. And this is, of course, because of the effort that you just mentioned, those targets, which mainly, when we're talking about targets, we have to say there are few families of them. The first one is the command and control, the commanders themselves, the Hezbollah operative, the terrorists, their infrastructure, and their arsenal. All of those things are being striked. So once you are doing it simultaneously, and for the Hezbollah, it's very hard to reorganize themselves. We see it, of course, very obvious with the leaders of the Hamas. And we're talking about Colonel 11 and up, but not only. If we, trying to compare it to a normal army, although we have to say that the Hezbollah, being a terrorist organization, but it is very hierarchical terrorist organization. It is much more stronger to most of the countries in Europe. If we're talking in military terms, much more organized, much more operatives. People have to understand it. When we're talking about terrorist organization, it's not that we're talking about 3,000 people that are hiding behind the trees with the Kalashnikov. This is a very, very organized organization. And this is, from one point, we could say that when it is such an organized organization, if you really strike all those different targets, as I just mentioned, you could really hurt him. And this is probably what we are seeing now. Again, we are still in the war. We still have to be humble. But this is probably what we are seeing now in the northern part of Israel.
But Jonathan, while we were speaking, the IDF has released an interim count of Hezbollah personnel who were eliminated in South Lebanon. This is, of course, in addition to the commanders and staff officers in Beirut. And as of this afternoon, Friday afternoon, 250 Hezbollah personnel, including 21 leaders, out of which 5 battalion commanders. This is quite a sizable group, and it's a 25-to-1 ratio in casualties, IDF versus Hezbollah.
Indeed, it speaks volumes, obviously, to the qualitative disparity between Israel and Iran, including all of its various proxies, particularly taking into account that Hezbollah is Iran's most potent force. People don't realize that it's even more potent than much of what the IRGC and the Iranian military has today in Iran proper, something that the Iranians have, of course, done strategically in order to deter Israel along its borderlines. But Mr. Oren, we had Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant visit the 36th Division earlier today. It was quite a significant visit, of course, during the holiday, a day after IDF Chief of General Staff Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi also visited the 98th and 36th Divisions, which are operational in Lebanon as we speak. What can you tell us about that? He speaks, of course, about many more unknowns that Israel has within its barrel prepared to confront Hezbollah.
So obviously, when a political figure, albeit with military experience, such as Defense Minister Gallant, a former Major General, when he visits the troops, he has quite a complex audience. He wants the soldiers themselves to know that their work is highly appreciated by everyone back home. He speaks to the domestic base to understand why sacrifices are needed and why reserve troops are going to be called up for quite a long time. He speaks to his own prime minister to indicate the limits of what the military can do when it is stretched along so many fronts. And he speaks to his American counterparts. Obviously, Defense Secretary Austin and Minister of Defense Gallant have been on the phone constantly, sometimes twice a day. And what the U.S. administration is telling Israel, but also publicly, so that everyone will know what the rules of the road are. Yes, you have the right, the justification to retaliate for the Iranian attack. 200 ballistic missiles, no nation would have let that go without a response. But we don't want you to hit the nuclear infrastructure in Iran, and consider the fact that if you hit the oil industry, Iran may retaliate against the Gulf, the Arab nations' oil industry, and then not only will a regional war ensue, but also the price of gasoline at the pump for the American motorists would sharply go up on the eve of the U.S. election.
Well, when we're talking about the nuclear infrastructure, I think it's outrageous that he spoke, and I think personally that he misspoke, and the subsequent interviews that ensued following that with him indicated that he was a lot more reserved about whether or not to criticize any of the targets in question. But nonetheless,
but you know, Jonathan, this is part of the NPT treaty. You are not supposed to hit nuclear targets, and you are not supposed to use nuclear weapons, which the United States has, of course, against non-nuclear, at least declared countries. So Biden just went through the motions. When asked, he didn't raise the subject on his own volition. He was presented with the question, so he said, no, I'm not for it.
not supportive of it. And yet again, is Israel a signatory of the NPT? No, it's not. So we'll
But
put
Iran
that
is.
aside.
Yeah.
But Iran is, and that puts the equation quite interestingly in a different equation. But the fact that it's a signatory to anything doesn't mean nothing to this Ayatollah regime in Tehran. And therefore, General Gavish, when we're hearing today Ayatollah Ali Khamenei speaking to his followers, who wholeheartedly chant death to Israel, death to America, and death to England, among other wishful thinking, it seems that the Iranians are signaling time and again that they are threatening Israel, that if they are getting hit by Israel at any of its strategic infrastructure, the response by the IRGC will be devastating. Israel is obviously preparing for a response, and it's not deterred by those Iranian statements. Nonetheless, Israel is also preparing for an all-out war.
Well, Jonathan, we always talk about, or during the last few months, we're talking about the new dimensions that we have here in this war. We talked about the cybernetic dimension. We talked about interception in space, the way of the Air Force and the ground forces are working very close together, the special way that our ground forces are fighting and so on. A lot of new dimensions of war, and probably one of the other new dimensions that we might highlight is the coalition. Israel was never part of coalition, so although we are not directly working in a coalition, but still we have to take in consideration what is happening with the countries around us and those that are in a way more close to Israel, for the United States and to the West. So I don't think that Israel is deterred from Iran, not anymore for sure. We see that the Iranians, we see and we know what they have in their arsenal. Again, we have to be humble, but basically what the Iranians have, that they could strike Israel, those are their missiles, and that's it. They tried with UAVs, none of them make it to Israel. They tried the cruise missiles, it's not working. They don't really have a strong air force, and also what they tried with their missile didn't basically made, I wouldn't say nothing, but non-Israeli was even injured after 300 projectiles that were shot toward Israel. And just as a reminder, 300 projectiles mean around 150 or around 300 libras of explosives. So those are huge number, and still they failed in their mission. So I don't think that Israel is deterred. Israel is not deterred in the northern part of Israel. We saw it with the Hezbollah. Israel shifted its strategy 1 month ago, and I think there is no question that Israel would do whatever is needed. Also with Iran, we saw it with the Houthis. We are in a different era, also in the state of mind of Israel. Israel is under the, I would say, among the military, but also among our leaders, there is an understanding that we're not staying in the defense anymore. So the question is how to do it on the right way, not because Israel is deterred from Iran. The question is how to do it in the right way, that we would also take in consideration what is happening with our partners and, of course, with the United States. Having said that, at the end of the day, Israel is looking at its own interest. Israel is the one that is being struck by all those attacks, but all those rockets, and you always begin this program with what happened here in the 7th of October. So we don't forget this.
Indeed. Mr. Oren, I'd like to divert our attention to the Gaza Strip and Judea and Samaria. We don't have very much time for that. In the Gaza Strip, the right-hand man of Sinwar, the head of government, has been confirmed as eliminated, something very significant, of course. And, of course, there was a very special operation in collaboration with the United States, with additional actors, to rescue a 21-year-old Yazidi girl who was captured when she was 11 and sold into the sex trade into the Gaza Strip. Of course, Hamas, who has affiliation to the Islamic State. What can you tell us about that more?
So, as you say, it was a very unique operation led by the COGAT, the Coordinator of Government Activities in the Territories, Major General Rassan Alian, who found out through his sources and through the intelligence community that indeed there is this 21-year-old woman who, when only a child of 11, was abducted. The Yazidis, of course, are in Iraq. Daesh, ISIS, massacred them, brutalized them, and raped and abducted, especially teenagers and even younger girls. And the woman was taken out of the Gaza Strip and transferred safely. The United States also helped, and this is a humanitarian effort on Israel because obviously, for all of the criticism against Israel on humanitarian issues, very few nations would have taken the effort during war to do it. Now, what you mentioned regarding the governing wing of Hamas is interesting because for the last 3 months, Hamas knew that its senior officials were gone, but it did not announce it, especially probably for fear of the population understanding that Hamas may no longer be in control on the civilian side. And only now have both Israel and Hamas published this fact. And if you add it to the military successes that the IDF has had over the last several months, the war in Gaza is almost over, save for the hostages.
Indeed. Well, I wouldn't say that it's almost over, but it is now in a state of low intensity with concrete challenges, not only on the military front, but also on the social front, and therefore Israel needs to expand its horizon when we're talking about its coordination and distribution, not only of humanitarian aid, but also of basic services. But let's also turn now to the Tulkarem. There was another situation in Judea and Samaria, particularly in the Samaria side of the equation. What can you tell us about that briefly, please?
So this is not a retaliation for the terror act which took place in Jaffa the other day with 7 civilians killed by 2 murderers from the Hebron area. There was an organized terror cell about to plan and execute another major terror act. Israel found out about it, and the intelligence agencies, along with the Air Force, have taken out the perpetrators, these particular leaders of a Hamas-affiliated gang. This is one of many actions, more to follow.
Thank you, Mr. Oren. General Gavish, the last 2 minutes are yours.
Well, you said 2 minutes, Jonathan, so allow me to take the first minute and to reflect on what you and Amir was discussing in the last few minutes. To tie it all, first of all, we understand with the Hamas that we are fighting against. We said it more than once, but this is the same Hamas, like ISIS, that what they are doing to Jewish families, they would do to the Yazidis. Those are cruel people. They took this young lady as a slave, sex slaves. Those are the savages that we are fighting against. So if anyone have any question marks, this is really what should be mentioned. The other thing that we should say that the goals of this war are not there yet. We also have to say this. The goals of this war is to bring the Israeli people in the northern part of Israel safely to the border. Same on the south part of Israel, and we always have to say that the hostages are still there. 101 hostages are still on the hand of this brutal Hamas that we need to, and we still need to bring them back. So there is still a way to go. Very unfortunate because we would like to finish it, but this is the challenge, and we are still strong.
Thank you,
Going
General
to Iran, I
Gavish.
think that we should all look back to the map that was shown by Prime Minister Netanyahu on the UN a week ago. This is where we're going. This is what everyone has to understand. There is those black spots on the map, which is Iran, the Houthis, those proxies in Lebanon, in Iraq, and Hezbollah in Lebanon. They are becoming weaker. We are striking them very, very hard. And there is the other side, which is the coalition, which we hope that by seeing that Iran is not so strong as everyone thought, it would also would be something that would show this region that there is a prospect.
Thank you, General Gavish, Mr. Oren, for all of your insights, and once again, Shana Tova, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem, wishing you a Shabbat Shalom.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background, 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job, I was the commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel, and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.
For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.